Kamala Harris, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, stepped into the private jet cabin with a faint smile on her lips. After weeks of back-to-back meetings and political engagements, she had been looking forward to this trip more than anything else. The Maldives, a tropical paradise, was where she hoped to relax and recharge. The jet was the epitome of luxury. Its interior featured plush leather seats, soft ambient lighting from the ceiling, and meticulously arranged amenities that exuded the vibe of a five-star hotel on the move. Kamala walked to her seat, placed her bag in the overhead rack, and sank into the chair, savoring a rare moment free from political pressures. A flight attendant with neatly tied blonde Hamily entered the cabin. She began greeting the passengers with a warm smile and a polite tone. However, when Emily's gaze landed on Kamala, a brief hesitation flickered across her face. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression that was harder to read. Kamala, with her sharp instincts, immediately noticed the subtle shift. She returned a gentle smile, nodding politely at Emily, though she couldn't help but wonder what had prompted the change in demeanor. Emily glanced at the passenger list in her hand, her eyes lingering a little longer on the name Kamala Harris. She then turned abruptly and walked quickly toward the service galley, where another flight attendant awaited her. Kamala decided not to dwell on the minor incident. She slipped off her shoes, reclined comfortably in her seat, and pulled out a book she had been reading. But before she could turn the first page, she felt a gaze directed at her from across the aisle. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, with long black hair, was watching her with a curious yet amicable expression. Kamala smiled. The woman responded with a small nod before quietly opening her laptop. She seemed engrossed in her work. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Emily returned to the cabin. This time, she avoided looking Kamala's way and moved directly past her, attending to the other passengers. Kamala noticed how Emily spoke kindly to each person, asking about their needs with genuine care. However, when Emily finally returned to Kamala's seat, she placed a glass of water on the tray with a small clink, saying nothing. Kamala raised an eyebrow. She picked up the glass, smiled graciously, and said, "Thank you. That's very thoughtful of you." Emily responded with a strange smile, offering no words before quickly retreating to the galley. Kamala sensed something was amiss. This wasn't the first time she had encountered hostility, but this felt like more than just a personal attitude. Something was unusual. An hour into the flight, Kamala still couldn't completely relax. She sat upright, sipped her water, and decided to shift her focus to the passenger across the aisle, the young woman from earlier. When their eyes met, the woman hesitated briefly before standing and walking over to Kamala's seat. "I'm Sarah," she whispered. "I couldn't help but notice that flight attendant doesn't seem to like you." Kamala offered a polite but cautious smile. "She's just doing her job." Sarah glanced around the cabin as if ensuring no one else could hear. "I don't mean to intrude, but I overheard her talking about you with another flight attendant near the galley. It worried me." Kamala kept her smile, but her eyes darkened slightly. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll keep that in mind." Sarah returned to her seat, and Kamala leaned back, her eyes half closed but her mind racing. Sarah's words had heightened her awareness. Emily's behavior wasn't just a fleeting annoyance. It seemed deliberate. But why? Kamala pondered whether this was something beyond the ordinary biases she had learned to navigate throughout her life. When Kamala glanced up again, she caught Emily's gaze from the galley. The look was fleeting, but it carried a coldness that Kamala couldn't ignore. Silently, Kamala reminded herself, "Stay calm, everything will come to light." Kamala tried to focus on the book in her hands, but the discomfort clung to her like a heavy fog. Though she wasn't looking directly, she could feel Emily's gaze from the service galley. It wasn't the casual curiosity of a flight attendant checking on passengers. It was the assessing, probing look of someone judging, perhaps even scrutinizing. Emily reappeared in the cabin, a tray of drinks balanced expertly in her hands. Her smile remained fixed as she politely offered beverages to each passenger. "Orange juice or green tea?" she asked sweetly, placing a glass in front of a businessman seated in the row ahead. When she reached Kamala, however, the smile faded slightly. Emily placed the glass on Kamala's tray table with a noticeably sharp clink, her voice losing its warmth. "This is your drink," she said curtly. Kamala looked up, her expression composed as she met Emily's gaze. "Thank you," she replied, her polite smile not masking the inquisitive look in her eyes. Emily didn't respond. She arched a brow and turned away, the tray still steady in her grip. A few nearby passengers glanced over but said nothing. The atmosphere seemed to thicken with an awkward silence. Across the aisle, Sarah leaned forward, disapproval written plainly across her face. In a low voice, she asked, "Kamala, did you notice her strange attitude? She's been acting like that since we boarded." Kamala set her glass down and kept her tone calm. "Perhaps it's just been a long workday," she said, though she didn't believe her own words. Sarah shook her head slightly, but leaned back, her watchful eyes following Emily. As a human rights lawyer, Sarah was accustomed to spotting injustice, and she couldn't ignore the stark contrast in how Emily treated Kamala compared to other passengers. It wasn't long before Emily returned, this time without the tray. She strode directly toward Kamala's seat and stopped abruptly, crossing her arms. "Are you sure you booked this flight properly?" she asked, her tone icy and unmasked in hostility. Her words immediately drew the attention of the nearby passengers, heads turned toward Kamala, curiosity mingling with discomfort. Kamala looked up again, her demeanor as calm as ever. "I booked through my office. My documents were checked and confirmed when I boarded. If you'd like to verify anything further, feel free." Emily raised an eyebrow, dissatisfaction etched on her face. "I just want to make sure everyone on this flight is where they're supposed to be." Kamala carefully placed her book on the tray table, her gaze sharpening. "If there's something specific you'd like to ask, please do so directly." Emily's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile, but she offered no response. She turned abruptly, her eyes lingering briefly on Sarah before disappearing into the galley. Sarah stood up and stepped closer to Kamala. In a hushed voice, she said, "Do you need my help? I don't want you to go through this alone." Kamala looked at her and smiled, grateful for the gesture. "Thank you, but I'm fine. I'd like to see what they intend to do next." Sarah nodded, but before returning to her seat, she slipped a small note onto Kamala's tray table. When Kamala unfolded it, she read the simple, urgent message. "Be careful. I think she's up to something." Folding the note back into her palm, Kamala quietly reflected. The subtle snow had escalated into overt hostility. But why? Was it simply because she was a woman of color, or was there a deeper, hidden reason behind Emily's behavior? From the galley, Kamala could hear muted whispers between Emily and another flight attendant. She couldn't catch the full conversation, but fragments like "not safe," "do something," and "report" stood out. Kamala tilted her head slightly, careful to keep her expression neutral. Across from her, Sarah continued to observe, her gaze meeting Kamala's, filled with unease. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. "I think they're targeting you." Kamala nodded faintly. "I did, but let's let them continue. The truth will come out." Sarah fell silent, though her tense posture revealed her readiness to intervene if things escalated further. Emily returned to the cabin with a more serious demeanor. She stopped near Kamala's seat, holding a passenger manifest in her hand. "Can I see your booking documents again? I need to verify that all the information matches." Kamala looked up, her calm gaze cutting through the tension. "I already presented my documents when I boarded. If there's an issue, I suggest you address it with the captain or a flight supervisor, not me." Emily hesitated momentarily, thrown off by Kamala's steady composure. "We just want to ensure everyone on board is where they're supposed to be. Safety is our top priority." Kamala's expression didn't waver. "I assure you, I pose no threat to the safety of this flight." Emily offered no reply, turning on her heel and leaving behind a charged silence. The cabin felt heavier as several passengers exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent. Sarah leaned toward Kamala again and murmured, "Something's not right. You need to be cautious." Kamala nodded, saying nothing. She placed her book on her lap and directed her gaze toward the galley door where Emily had vanished. She knew this ordeal was far from over. As the flight continued, Kamala felt the weight of attention in the cabin pressing down on her. The combined whispers of Sarah's warning and Emily's behavior hinted at a larger confrontation brewing. Kamala leaned back in her seat, her sharp eyes scanning the ceiling of the cabin. What should have been a peaceful journey now felt like the beginning of an unexpected battle, one where her opponent remained cloaked in shadow. Kamala tried to maintain her composure as the glass on the table trembled slightly from the aircraft's turbulence. But deep inside, she could feel something unusual gradually becoming evident. It wasn't a technical issue with the plane, but rather something unfolding right within the cabin. Emily's increasingly bold demeanor wasn't just unprofessional, it carried a deeper, more sinister intent, and Kamala was keenly aware of it. Emily returned to the cabin, this time not carrying a tray of drinks but a small file folder. She walked through the rows of seats, her gaze no longer hiding its scrutinizing intent. When she reached Kamala, she stopped, standing tall with her arms crossed. "Mrs. Harris," Emily began, her voice attempting to sound like a polite reminder, but laced with unmistakable menace. "I need you to provide your booking documents. We need to ensure all passengers on this flight are properly vetted." A few nearby passengers glanced up, curiosity and unease written all over their faces. Sarah, seated near Kamala, leaned forward slightly, gripping the armrest as if ready to intervene at any moment. Kamala placed her book down on the table, looking up at Emily with a calm expression, though her eyes were sharp as blades. "Miss, I provided valid documentation when I boarded. I trust everything was verified. If you need further confirmation, I can have my office contact the airline directly." Emily smirked, her smile tinged with mockery. "Oh, there's no need for that. This is just a standard procedure to ensure the safety of the flight." She lowered her voice, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm sure you understand. Not everyone belongs everywhere." A ripple of shock spread through the cabin. A few people turned to look at Kamala, their gazes a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Sarah, unable to stay silent any longer, stood up abruptly. "Miss," Sarah said firmly, her voice clear and strong, "this is not standard procedure. This is blatant discrimination. She's done nothing wrong, and I don't believe you have the authority to act this way." Emily turned to Sarah, her sharp gaze full of challenge. "Ma'am, this does not concern you. We're doing this for everyone's safety on board." Sarah didn't waver. "I'm a human rights attorney. I know exactly what rights passengers have. What you're doing not only violates Mrs. Harris's individual rights, but also tarnishes the reputation of this airline." Emily raised an eyebrow, saying nothing, and turned abruptly to head back into the galley. Moments later, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, breaking the tense atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to technical reasons, we will be making an emergency landing at a nearby airport. Please remain calm and follow the crew's instructions." Kamala lifted her head, narrowing her eyes slightly. This sudden, technical reason felt far too coincidental, and she couldn't help but suspect it was linked to the unfolding situation. Sarah turned to Kamala, her eyes filled with concern. Kamala gave a small nod, silently assuring her she was fine. Emily reappeared from the galley, her expression more rigid than before. She walked straight to Kamala, her hostility now undisguised. "Mrs. Harris, I need you to pack your belongings. Upon landing, you will be required to disembark immediately." Her words struck like a slap to the atmosphere, plunging the cabin into silence. Several passengers gaped, clearly in disbelief at what they had just heard. This time, Sarah couldn't hold back. "You have no right to force her off this plane without just cause." Sarah's voice was loud, echoing through the cabin. "This is an abuse of power, and I will not stand for it." Emily turned to Sarah, pointing a finger directly at her. "You need to keep quiet. This doesn't concern you." Sarah stepped forward, standing face to face with Emily. "You're wrong. This concerns all of us. Your discriminatory and abusive actions are an insult to every passenger here." The tension in the cabin erupted. Crew members attempted to intervene, urging Sarah to sit down, but the passengers began murmuring, and some turned toward Emily with visible disapproval. An older man seated near the front spoke up. "Miss, I think you're overstepping. No one here feels threatened by her." Emily, now visibly cornered, said nothing further but held firm in her decision. When the plane landed at a small, isolated airport, Kamala was forced to gather her belongings and leave the cabin. Emily stood at the door, her cold gaze following Kamala as she disembarked. While no other passengers dared to intervene further, their eyes tracked every move as Kamala prepared to step off the plane. Sarah approached her. "I'll testify for you. This cannot go unchallenged." Kamala gave a grateful smile, her eyes radiating determination. "Thank you. I won't let them get away with this." As Kamala stepped onto the tarmac, her eyes focused straight ahead, never looking back. Yet inside her, a quiet rage simmered. She wasn't just insulted, she understood that this was no random act. It was a calculated, deliberate attack, and she was resolute in exposing the truth. The plane slowly taxied away, lifting off and disappearing into the horizon, leaving Kamala standing alone on the empty runway. Around her, only the stillness of a quiet airport remained. But in her mind, the wheels were already turning. They think I'll stay silent, but they're wrong. Kamala took her first steps into a new chapter, a fight not for leisure, but against the injustice she had just endured. Kamala stood still on the tarmac, the small plane gradually disappearing from sight, leaving behind an absolute silence. The scorching heat radiated off the asphalt, stinging her face and amplifying the feelings of isolation and humiliation. Around her, the scene was eerily desolate. No airport staff, no moving vehicles. Just a small building a few hundred meters away that looked like an old administrative office. Dragging her suitcase behind her, Kamala made her way toward the building, each step echoing against the empty tarmac, a solitary sound in the vast stillness. The building seemed abandoned, its walls marked with cracks and its windows clouded with dust. As Kamala pushed open the door, the interior mirrored the neglect outside. Worn-out plastic chairs, a reception desk covered in cobwebs, and scattered papers littering the floor. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a landline or any means of communication. After a few minutes of rummaging, she found an old phone on the reception desk. Lifting the receiver, she clung to a faint hope that it might still work, but all she heard was the static hum of a disconnected line. She placed the receiver back, sat down on one of the plastic chairs, her hands resting on her suitcase and her gaze fixed on the void before her. She pulled out her cell phone again, only to be greeted by the cold, unyielding words, "No service." Kamala squinted, wondering whether the lack of signal was due to the remoteness of the area or deliberate interference. She checked again, but the result remained unchanged. Outside, the sun began to set, its golden glow yielding to encroaching darkness. Kamala knew she couldn't stay at the airport much longer. The area seemed unsecured, and she had no way of knowing if it would be safe once night fell. Rising to her feet, she grabbed her suitcase and stepped back outside, this time heading toward a narrow path leading away from the airport. The shadow of the distant forest seemed to swallow the trail ahead. With no other options, Kamala turned on the flashlight, her only find in the abandoned office, and began walking. Her footsteps crunched against the dry ground, blending with the rustling sounds of the forest. Each gust of wind set the leaves whispering, creating the eerie impression of being watched. Kamala glanced over her shoulder a few times, but saw nothing beyond the enveloping darkness. Still, a sense of unease clung to her, quickening her heartbeat. About 20 minutes in, she heard a faint sound behind her. It wasn't the wind or branches, it was footsteps. She stopped, turned, and shone her flashlight into the darkness behind her. Nothing. Just the empty trail and bushes flanking the sides. But she knew she wasn't alone. Forcing herself to stay calm, Kamala resumed walking, now slower and more attuned to every sound around her. When a faint light appeared in the distance, Kamala felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was the glow of small houses clustered at the edge of the forest. As she approached, the sounds of life reached her, laughter, children playing, and the soft melodies of folk songs carried by the air. She exhaled deeply and stepped into the village. The villagers, curious yet warm, quickly gathered around her. A tall, kind-faced man stepped forward, his voice steady and welcoming. "Ma'am," he said, "you look like you've had a tough journey. Is everything all right?" Kamala managed a faint smile, though exhaustion was evident. "I was left stranded at the nearby airport. I need to contact my office, but there's no phone service there." The man nodded, his expression sympathetic. "The signal here isn't great either, but you're welcome to rest for the night. We'll help you in the morning." Kamala was led to a small house where the villagers brought her food and water. An elderly woman, seemingly the community caregiver, gently tended to the minor scratches on Kamala's legs. Meanwhile, a young girl, about 12 years old, with bright, eager eyes, approached her. "You're Kamala Harris, aren't you?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "I've seen you on TV. You're amazing. I want to grow up and be just like you." Kamala's smile softened, her eyes warm as they met the girl's. "Thank you, Asha, but you're already strong. I believe you can do anything you set your mind to." Asha grasped Kamala's hand tightly, her eyes shining with determination. "But you're here all alone. Did something bad happen?" Kamala nodded gently. "Yes, Asha, but I'm okay. I believe that the truth always prevails, and I won't let anyone get away with doing wrong without facing the consequences." That night, Kamala lay on a simple bed in the small house. The soft glow of an oil lamp on the table calmed her, but her mind buzzed with thoughts. From the events on the plane to Emily's blatant hostility and the suspicious emergency landing, Kamala knew this was no coincidence. Something bigger was at play, and she was determined to uncover it. Outside, the sound of crickets blended with the gentle rustling of the wind, but within Kamala's heart, the peace was fleeting. She knew the real battle was yet to come, and she was ready for it. Closing her eyes, her lips pressed into a firm line of resolve. "They think they can humiliate me without consequence, but I'll show them. No one does wrong and escapes accountability." The morning in the small village began with serene sounds. Roosters crowing in the distance, children running and laughing, and the murmurs of soft conversations. Kamala woke up in a modest room, sunlight gently streaming through the window. Though still weary from the exhausting journey, her eyes gleamed with determination. This was not just a disrupted trip. It was an opportunity to stand up against injustice. The villagers, with their warmth and hospitality, had prepared breakfast for her. During the meal, Jamal, the village chief, approached with important news. "We've managed to contact an acquaintance in a nearby town," he said, his voice kind yet purposeful. "They can help you reach a place with a phone signal. We'll take you there whenever you're ready." Kamala smiled, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Jamal. Your kindness is something I'll never forget." While waiting, Kamala spent time chatting with the villagers. A young girl named Asha stood nearby, her excitement barely contained. "Are you really Kamala Harris?" Asha asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "I saw you on TV. I want to grow up and be strong like you." Kamala placed a gentle hand on Asha's shoulder, her gaze soft. "You're already strong, Asha, and you can do anything if you believe in yourself." Kamala's words made Asha clench her fists, her eyes sparkling as though she just discovered a new strength within herself. "What will you do next, Kamala?" Asha asked her, small voice brimming with trust. Kamala took a deep breath, looking toward the horizon. "I'm going back home to make things right. No one has the right to treat anyone unfairly." After several hours in an old pickup truck, Kamala reached a small town where she finally found a phone signal. She immediately called her office. Her assistant, Kevin, answered, his voice filled with concern. "Kamala, finally, you called. We've been worried sick since yesterday. What happened?" Kamala took a steadying breath. "I'll explain everything when I'm back, but right now I need you to prepare for a press conference. This isn't just personal, it's a fight we can't afford to ignore." Hours later, Kamala arrived at a major airport in Washington, where Kevin and her legal team were waiting. The car ride back to her office was tense, filled with frustration and resolve. Even Kevin, usually the calmest person in the room, couldn't hide his anger. "The airline issued a statement," Kevin said, his tone sharp with sarcasm. "They claimed it was a routine safety decision by the flight crew." Kamala raised an eyebrow. "Do they think I'll fall for that empty excuse? We have evidence, witnesses. They can't hide forever." Kevin nodded. "I've contacted Sarah, the passenger who stood up for you on the flight. She's willing to testify. Plus, another passenger recorded the entire incident. Their videos going viral on social media." Kamala leaned back in her seat, her eyes burning with resolve. "Good. We won't let this fade away. This is our chance to speak up for those who can't." The next day, a major press conference was held outside Kamala's office. Reporters from across the country gathered, cameras trained on the podium. Kamala stepped out in a dark suit, exuding confidence, though her indignation was palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice ringing with conviction. "Yesterday, I experienced something no one, absolutely no one, should have to endure. On a flight to the Maldives, I was insulted, targeted, and ultimately removed from the plane without a valid reason. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. This was not just an act of discrimination. It was a symptom of a system that abuses its power, a system that believes it can act without consequence. Her words resonated powerfully. The live-streamed press conference garnered millions of views within hours. The hashtag Justice for Kamala began trending on social media, drawing attention not only from the public, but also from political and media circles. Meanwhile, the airline hastily released a statement denying responsibility, claiming that Emily, the flight attendant, had acted on her own. But this only fueled public outrage. Investigative journalists dug deeper and uncovered that Emily had acted on orders from an airline executive with political motives to target Kamala. Kamala and her legal team seized the opportunity. They filed a lawsuit against the airline, alleging discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. Sarah and other passengers, including the one who recorded the video, pledged to testify. "We're not suing just for my dignity," Kamala declared in an interview. "We're suing to ensure no one else has to go through this." That evening, as Kamala reviewed legal documents in her office, Kevin walked in, his face lit with excitement. "Kamala, we just received a major tip," he said, handing her a folder. "Another flight attendant from that flight has come forward. She claims Emily was acting on direct orders from higher-ups to have you removed." Kamala opened the folder, skimming quickly. "Which higher-up?" "It was an airline executive," Kevin explained. "According to her statement, he has political connections and didn't want you on that flight." Kamala set the folder down, her eyes steely with determination. "So this isn't just discrimination. It's a conspiracy, and we're going to expose it." She looked out the window, the city lights twinkling against the night sky. Kamala knew this fight wasn't just about her. It was about justice. "They think they can bury the truth, but I'll make sure the world sees it." The story of the incident on Kamala Harris's flight became the center of attention across the United States. Every detail of the hostility from the flight attendant, Emily, and the humiliating way Kamala was forced to leave the plane was shared and went viral. People from human rights activists to everyday supporters united in her defense. The hashtag Justice for Kamala became a symbol of the fight, not only for her, but for everyone who had ever faced discrimination. Kamala was not merely facing a personal battle. This was an opportunity to fight for justice and push for systemic change. Her legal team worked tirelessly, preparing all necessary evidence to confront one of the largest airlines in the world. The trial took place on a drizzly morning. Kamala stepped out of a sleek black car, her face calm yet resolute. The crowd outside the courthouse erupted into cheers as she appeared. Many held up signs with messages like, "Justice for Kamala" and "End discrimination." Cameras flashed incessantly, capturing every step she took as she made her way inside. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Emily, the flight attendant, sat on the defendant's side, looking anxious and uneasy. Beside her was the airline's legal team, composed of seasoned professionals who clearly felt the weight of public scrutiny. On Kamala's side, her legal team was impeccably prepared, with every document and piece of evidence meticulously organized. Kamala's attorney, a renowned middle-aged woman with a sterling reputation in human rights law, began the proceedings. Her voice was steady yet powerful as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, we are here today not just to restore the dignity of my client, Mrs. Kamala Harris, but to denounce behavior that is utterly unacceptable in our society. Mrs. Harris, a woman who has dedicated her life to justice, was publicly humiliated on a flight. This incident not only disrespected her personally, but also sent a harmful message about how we treat one another." She presented the first piece of evidence, a video recorded by a passenger. The video showed Emily openly using discriminatory language and forcing Kamala off the plane. It played on a large screen, and the courtroom fell silent as Emily's voice rang out clearly. "You don't belong here." The airline's legal team attempted to counter by claiming Emily was merely performing her safety duties. However, this argument quickly crumbled as witnesses began to testify. Sarah, a lawyer who had been seated next to Kamala on the flight, was the first to take the stand. She recounted every detail of Emily's behavior, from her initial condescending attitude to the public humiliation of Kamala in front of other passengers. She had no valid reason to remove Mrs. Harris from the plane, Sarah said, her voice sharp. I couldn't stay silent when I witnessed such behavior. It was blatant discrimination, and it wasn't just directed at Kamala Harris. It's emblematic of how vulnerable people are often treated. Another passenger who had recorded the video also testified. I was seated nearby and saw no indication that Mrs. Harris was a threat, he said. That flight attendant acted without any justification. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected witness, another flight attendant on the same flight. Initially reluctant to testify out of fear of losing her job, she decided to speak out after the incident gained widespread attention. I overheard the executive give an order through the internal communication system, she said, her voice trembling but determined. He told us to handle Mrs. Harris. Emily was just following instructions. I didn't agree with it, but I didn't know what else to do. The courtroom buzzed with shock. This testimony shifted the case from an individual act to an orchestrated plan. Kamala's legal team continued presenting evidence, including internal emails from the airline, revealing that executives had communicated with Emily prior to the flight. These emails contained language implying Kamala was unwelcome and should be removed at all costs. In her closing argument, Kamala's attorney stood, her voice resonating through the courtroom. This case is not just about my client's dignity. It is a reminder that no one has the right to abuse their position of power to harm others. We must send a clear message. Injustice, whether large or small, will not be tolerated. After days of testimony, the jury took only a few hours to reach a verdict. They found Emily and the airline guilty of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. The airline was ordered to pay a substantial fine and implement comprehensive reforms in employee training. Emily was immediately terminated, and executives involved were placed under further investigation. As Kamala exited the courthouse, she was met with a throng of supporters. Cheers erupted, and signs reading "Justice has prevailed" were held high. She stepped onto a podium, her gaze steady and her voice ringing clear. Today, justice has been served, but our work doesn't stop here. This is a wake-up call to all of us that injustice, wherever it exists, must be confronted. The crowd roared, creating a moment that would not soon be forgotten. Kamala's story became not just her victory, but an inspiration for millions around the world. Back in her office, Kamala gazed out at the glittering city lights against the night sky. She knew this battle marked a turning point in her career and for all those fighting for justice. But she also knew the journey was far from over. They thought I would back down, she thought, but this is only the beginning. After winning the trial, Kamala Harris's story didn't stop at just being a high-profile lawsuit. It became a symbol of the fight against injustice and discrimination. News outlets, articles, and television programs continually updated the public on new developments, while waves of support for Kamala spread far and wide. However, Kamala understood this was just the beginning. She didn't want her victory to merely defend her personal dignity. She wanted it to catalyze a greater change. Immediately after the trial concluded, Kamala organized an internal meeting with her team in a large conference room. She stood before a whiteboard, surrounded by colleagues, including Kevin, the legal team, and her longtime advisors. This victory is a significant step forward, she began, her determined gaze sweeping across the room. But if we stop here, all our efforts will amount to just a lone story. We must seize this moment to drive change, not just in aviation, but across every sector of society. Kevin nodded. I've reviewed some policy proposals. We could collaborate with lawmakers to push for anti-discrimination laws in the service industry, particularly in aviation. Establishing transparent reporting processes and passenger protections could be the first step. Not only that, Kamala continued, we need to educate the public about their rights. Many people face unfair treatment, but don't know how to stand up for themselves. This is an opportunity for us to shift perceptions. Another advisor, Linda, added, I think we should also create an online platform where people can share their stories and seek legal support. Kamala nodded in agreement. Fantastic. Let's make it happen. Meanwhile, Kamala's story continued to be widely shared. A week after the trial, she appeared on a popular live television program. Viewers eagerly awaited her thoughts on the groundbreaking case. The host, a seasoned journalist, began, "Miss Kamala Harris, your story has inspired millions. Can you share your thoughts following your victory in court?" Kamala sat upright, her gaze calm but piercing. "This victory isn't just mine," she said. "It belongs to everyone who has endured discrimination but lacked a voice. It proves that if we stand up and fight, justice will prevail." The host pressed on, "What do you think is the biggest lesson from this case?" Kamala smiled faintly, her voice gentle yet firm. "The greatest lesson is this: no one has the right to make you feel unworthy. No matter who you are or where you're from, you have value and deserve to be treated with fairness." After the interview, thousands of messages, emails, and handwritten letters flooded Kamala's office. Each letter carried a story, a voice from people who had faced similar injustices. One young woman wrote, "I was refused service at a restaurant because of my skin color. I didn't have the courage to speak up, but your story has given me the strength to fight for myself." Another letter came from an elderly man. "I stayed silent for years, thinking the injustices I experienced didn't matter. But you've reminded me that every voice has the power to bring about change." Kamala read each letter, deeply moved by the pain, helplessness, and hope they conveyed. This only strengthened her resolve to keep going, to lay the groundwork for lasting change. Kamala founded a nonprofit organization called Justice for All. The organization focused not only on protecting the rights of those who face discrimination, but also on educating the public, advocating for equitable policies, and providing legal support for victims of injustice. At the organization's launch event, Kamala stood before a packed auditorium filled with hundreds of attendees. Her voice resonated through the space as she declared, "Justice for All is more than just an organization. It's a commitment that we will not turn our backs on the vulnerable. We will stand up, fight, and create a society where everyone is respected without exception." Her words were met with resounding applause and cheers. Many in the audience were moved to tears, feeling the sincerity and determination in her voice. Meanwhile, the airline at the center of the lawsuit faced mounting pressure from all sides. Following the court's ruling, they were forced to issue a public apology to Kamala and commit to comprehensive reforms. Several executives were dismissed, while new anti-discrimination training programs were implemented. Other airlines also began revising their policies, fearing they might become the next targets. One evening, as Kamala worked late in her office, a call from Asha, the young girl from the village where she had once been left behind, touched her deeply. Asha's face appeared on the screen, her eyes shining brightly. "Miss Kamala, I wanted to thank you," Asha said. "Because of you, I've decided what I want to do. I want to become a lawyer just like you. I want to help those who are treated unfairly." Kamala smiled, pride gleaming in her eyes. "You can do it, Asha. I believe in you, and when you're ready, I'll be here to support you." Sitting alone in her office later that night, the city lights twinkling through the window, Kamala sipped her tea, savoring a rare moment of peace. Her fight had become more than a personal triumph. It was now a source of inspiration for millions. "They thought I would falter," she reflected, her eyes gazing into the distance. "But they didn't realize this is just the beginning of a fairer future." After a resounding victory in court, Kamala Harris realized that her story was no longer just about a single lawsuit. It had become a symbol of the global fight against injustice and discrimination. But for Kamala, this was not an endpoint. It was the beginning of a greater journey, the pursuit of a more equitable and inclusive society. In the weeks that followed, Kamala and her team focused on scaling the organization Justice for All. The organization not only garnered financial support from donors and businesses, but also attracted thousands of volunteers across the country. One morning, Kevin, Kamala's trusted assistant, walked into her office holding a thick folder. "Kamala, we've received over 2,000 requests for assistance in just the past 2 weeks," he said, his voice a mixture of excitement and concern. From people facing workplace discrimination, denial of services due to their race, to cases of abuse of authority in service industries. "It seems your story has given people hope." Kamala flipped through the pages of the folder, reading heartbreaking yet determined stories. A woman wrote about being fired simply because she was pregnant. A young man shared how he was denied a job for being transgender. Each story was a testament to the challenges still present in society. We need to act immediately, she said, her eyes sharp with resolve. We can't let them feel alone or powerless for another second. Kevin, assemble the legal team and prioritize the most urgent cases. Kevin nodded and left with the folder in hand. Kamala stood by the office window, gazing out at the distant sky. We can't change everything overnight, but every step we take makes a difference. To amplify their message and reach more people, Kamala began organizing forums in major cities nationwide. At each event, she shared her story and listened to the voices of the community. One of the largest gatherings took place in Chicago, where thousands came together to participate. As Kamala stepped onto the stage, she faced the crowd. The lights from cameras and countless eyes focused on her. She took a deep breath, her voice resonant yet filled with emotion. I stand here today not just for myself. I stand for everyone who has been treated unfairly, for everyone whose voice has been dismissed. But remember this, we are not alone. Together we can fight and change the world. She paused, looking into the faces below. This journey will not be easy, but it is worth it. Every step we take is a beacon of light in the darkness. The hall erupted into prolonged applause. A young woman in the audience broke into tears, whispering to her friend, "She's not just speaking for herself, she's speaking for all of us." Meanwhile, Justice for All continued to gain momentum. Volunteer lawyers from across the nation joined the cause, providing free legal assistance for urgent cases. Several large companies also pledged to improve their anti-discrimination policies and fund community education programs. Sarah, the lawyer who had defended Kamala during the flight incident, had become one of the organization's key advisors. In a strategy meeting, Sarah proposed a new initiative. "We should launch human rights training programs in schools and workplaces," she said. "Many people don't realize they have rights to protection. If we educate early, we can prevent misconduct before it happens." Kamala nodded in agreement. "That's an excellent idea. Let's implement pilot programs immediately. We'll start with the most vulnerable communities." On the political front, Kamala was invited to serve as an advisor for a new bill titled the Comprehensive Fairness Act. The legislation aimed to combat discrimination in service industries, ensure rights for marginalized groups, and impose strict penalties for abuse of authority. In a meeting with legislators, Kamala shared her thoughts. "We need a system that not only protects, but also promotes equality. No one should live in fear because they are different. Let's make this bill a true tool for change." One day, Kamala received an email from a young woman in India. The email read, "Dear Miss Kamala, your story changed my life. I used to believe I wasn't strong enough to speak up after being denied a job just because I'm a woman. But when I read about you, I decided not to remain silent, and now I'm working in the job I was once denied. Thank you for giving me hope." As Kamala read those words, her heart swelled with emotion. Stories like these reminded her that while the journey was challenging, every step brought hope and change. At an event honoring inspirational women, Kamala was awarded the Justice Trailblazer Award. As she stepped up to accept the honor, she spoke. "This award is not just for me, it's for everyone who has stood up, who has found their voice despite fear. I promise to keep fighting, not just for myself, but for all of us." The audience gave a standing ovation, creating an unforgettable moment of solidarity and inspiration. One late evening, Kamala stood on the balcony of her office, looking out at the city lights sparkling in the night. The successes so far were just the beginning. In her heart, the flame of justice burned bright. "We've come so far," she thought, "but the road ahead is even longer, and I'm ready to keep walking." Time passed, and the influence of Kamala Harris and the Justice for All organization extended far beyond the borders of the United States, becoming a source of inspiration for justice movements worldwide. Her story was translated into multiple languages, featured in international newspapers, major conferences, and even online forums. But Kamala understood that this attention was not just an honor, it was also a responsibility. One morning, as Kamala was meeting with her team at the Washington office, Kevin walked in holding a letter in his hand. "Kamala," he said, his voice brimming with excitement, "we've just received an invitation from the United Nations. They want you to speak at this year's Global Human Rights Summit. The room fell silent for a few seconds before erupting in cheers. Kamala closed her eyes for a moment, letting the significance of this moment sink in. This is a big opportunity, she said. We're not just representing those who have faced injustice. We must drive change on a global scale. Kevin nodded, his eyes shining. I'll make sure everything is prepared. You're going to have the strongest voice at this event. A month later, Kamala took the stage at the Global Human Rights Summit in Geneva. The vast auditorium was filled with leaders, activists, scholars, and representatives from hundreds of nations. Kamala stood at the podium, the spotlight illuminating her face. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice both powerful and sincere. My story is not unique. I am one of millions who have faced injustice, but I was fortunate to have the chance to fight and reclaim justice. Today, I am not here to tell my story, but to speak for those who cannot. She continued, we live in a world where injustice knows no borders. Discrimination, abuse of power, and emotional violence exist everywhere. Our mission is not only to heal, but also to prevent. To achieve that, we must act now. Kamala's speech was met with a standing ovation. Many leaders approached her afterward, proposing collaborations on global initiatives to advance human rights. Following the summit, Kamala didn't stop at delivering speeches. She began partnering with international organizations, joining advisory councils, and launching projects in various countries. One of her largest initiatives was the Global Justice Network, a platform connecting human rights organizations worldwide to share experiences, resources, and strategies. At a meeting in Nairobi, Kamala met Asha, a young woman from the small village where Kamala had once been abandoned. Now grown, Asha had become a lawyer working for a non-governmental organization in Kenya. Miss Kamala, Asha said, her eyes sparkling, because of you, I found my voice. I want to thank you for inspiring me and so many others. Kamala placed a hand on Asha's shoulder, her gaze tender. No, Asha, you're the one who stood up and fought. You are proof that we can change the world if we dare to dream and take action. In the months that followed, Kamala and her team expanded their training programs and legal support initiatives. In the U.S., Justice for All established community centers across multiple states, offering free legal counseling and hosting human rights workshops. One of their most significant achievements was the passage of the Comprehensive Justice Act by the U.S. Congress, a landmark bill designed to protect citizens from discrimination in services and workplaces. At the White House signing ceremony, Kamala stood beside the president, feeling a deep sense of pride as she witnessed the fruits of relentless effort. This is not just a victory for those who have faced injustice, she said in her speech. It is a declaration that we as a society will not tolerate inequality in any form. Shortly afterward, Kamala was invited to publish a book titled Light in the Darkness. It recounted her journey and shared the lessons she had learned from other stories. The book quickly became a global phenomenon. It was not just her personal narrative, but a call to action for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. One late evening, Kamala sat in her office, gazing at the shimmering city. On her desk were documents from new projects, emails from international colleagues, and a handwritten letter from a 10-year-old girl in Brazil. The girl wrote, "Dear Miss Kamala, I want to be like you. I want to help people feel respected and loved." Kamala held the letter, her heart swelling with warmth and responsibility. She knew her journey was far from over. There was still so much to do, and she was ready to keep fighting. Kamala stepped out onto her balcony. The night wind brushed through her hair, carrying the gentle hum of the city below. She looked up at the star-filled sky, feeling the light of new hopes being kindled. This isn't just my story, she thought. This is our story, and I won't stop until justice reaches everyone, everywhere. Kamala Harris's journey reminds us that monumental change often starts with small actions, daring to speak up, daring to take the first step, even when the road ahead seems daunting. Justice doesn't happen naturally. It's the result of perseverance, courage, and the power of unity. Each of us has the ability to make a difference, no matter how small. If this story has touched you, share it as a positive message to your community. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following inspiring stories and the ongoing fight for justice. Join us in turning small steps today into a brighter future for all.